Hello, everyone. This is the next installment of our Stormwater seminar series. I am welcoming back Dr. Chris Obropta, who is the Extension Specialist of Water Resources for the Rutgers Cooperative Extension. So he is back with another installment as part of our NEMO initiative. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Chris. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about an inspection of stormwater management facilities, mostly detention and retention basins and infiltration basins and catch basins, and tell you a little bit about how those things are different, and really kind of give you a feel about what your public works departments are doing in your towns. And if public works departments are watching this, maybe give them some ideas of how they might be able to do these inspections a little bit easier or a little bit more efficiently. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the permit requirements that the state has. Towns are required to do this, and then a little bit about catch basin inspections. Then we're going to go through the other set of systems. Um, so the first thing we need to kind of understand is little definitions here. So stormwater drain inlet. What we're talking about is actually the grate that leads to where the water is going to go, right? So we start thinking about this stormwater drain, and this is actually the drain itself, right? So it's just really the cover, and underneath here is a box that water is going to go to. That box is the catch basin, and you can see this one has a big opening on it, and this one has a small opening on it, so that water bottles and things can't get in there. And this is really the design on the right-hand side is the one that New Jersey is trying to get everybody to install, and actually it's requiring people to install that now. So every town has a permit. All 565 municipalities has a permit for what's called their municipal separate storm source system. So that's for the catch basins and the roads, for their detention basins, for their drainage ditches, for those inlets I just showed you. And that permit requires towns to inspect these inlets at least once a year and make sure they're operating properly. If they're not operating properly, they have to clean them and make sure that they get rid of the trash and the sediment. You can see I've got some pictures of some that aren't operating properly. You can see this here up top right, loaded with garbage. I don't know, is that a Popeyes cup there? Maybe, I don't know. And then we have one down here, and this is kind of city of Newark. Maybe I should ask Natalie if I could use their picture, but this is a picture we use all the time. But you can see when you have this debris on it, water can't get in there. And it's going to flood the roads, and that's going to be a big problem. So cleaning this is crucially important for the town. Okay. The next thing we have to think about, that's the inlet. So next thing is the catch basin. So once again, you have the inlets on top, the catch basins underneath. So it's this concrete box. Sometimes it's in older towns, it's made out of bricks, but the idea is the water's going to come in, it's going to fill this box up, and then it's going to go out. So as fast as the water comes in, fills it up, goes out the pipe. Maybe there's another pipe coming in from the box upstream. This is kind of what it looks like when it's delivered to the site. It's usually a pre-manufactured concrete box, and then they cut holes in this to put the pipes in. So this is what the system is. So these have to be cleaned on a regular basis too. Okay. It's a little different for these because a lot of towns have many catch basins. I worked in a town like Hamilton Township in Mercer County. I believe they have like 7,000 catch basins. So the idea with this is that the state wants you to inspect these once every 5 years and clean them when they need to be cleaned once again. Okay, so what they say is if you have less than 1,000 of them, you should be inspecting every year. But if you have more than 1,000, then you can divide it up and do 20% of them every year over the 5-year period. Okay, so if you have 4,000 basins, basically you're going to do 1,000 every year for at least the first 4 years, and then maybe the 5th year have some time to go back and clean the ones that are really dirty. Okay. The other thing that you're supposed to do is you're supposed to clean out your piping system too, your conveyance system. So the permit has in it this municipal separate storm source system, or MS4 conveyance system. And here's how they define it. It really is the system that moves water around town. So it could be a pipe like this, it's underground, attached to a catch basin, or it could be something as simple as a drainage ditch like this. So both of these are considered conveyance systems. Both of these are regulated under the permit. Both of these are required to be maintained by the town. Okay. And you can see here, not only is it supposed to be maintained, it's supposed to be inspected. So you can see here, they've got little cameras they could send down these, and little robots go down there and take pictures and see where the clogs are. Then you have a guy here with a big vacuum or a jet vac blowing it out, cleaning it out, getting all this debris out. This is very time consuming. It's very expensive to do because you obviously got to take the grade off. You got to hire this guy to do this. You got to have the machinery, this camera videotaping. It's not easy. So this is going to be a big burden on the towns as they get their new permits starting in January of 2023. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is stormwater facilities. So we think about facilities. These are actually the places that we're actually capturing water. So the catch basin can be considered a facility, but we're mostly talking about these larger systems. So here we have a detention basin here. Here we have a bioretention basin here. So it can be any range of these things: filter strips, vegetation buffers, sand filters, constructed wetlands. So there's a lot of different things that fall into this category. And what you're required to do is you're required to inspect these and maintain these on a regular basis. So every one of these systems here should have a maintenance plan associated with it. And that maintenance plan talks about how often it should be inspected, how often it should be cleaned, how to clean it. So you're supposed to follow that maintenance plan. If you don't have a maintenance plan, that's a problem, because now the state wants you to inspect it at least 4 times a year. Most maintenance plans say you only need to inspect it once a year, but if you don't have a maintenance plan, they want you to inspect it 4 times a year and inspect it every time after you get 1 inch of rain. So I think what this leads me to believe is that many towns, if you don't have a maintenance plan for a system, you should develop one, because it'll reduce the amount of inspection you need to do, because inspecting these once a year is probably all you really need to do. Okay. And then if you see it's not working, you have a certain time schedule to maintain it. And that corrective measure has to be done no later than 90 days from discovering that there's a problem. So in other words, you go into a detention basin and you see there's a problem, it's clogged, you've got 90 days to fix that problem. Okay. The other big thing with this is that we want to keep good records. Okay. A lot of towns are doing these inspections. A lot of towns are doing this maintenance, but they're not keeping maintenance logs. They're not doing maintenance reports. And those are crucially important, because that's what gets sent on to New Jersey DEP to show that you're complying with your permit. If you don't do the reports, DEP assumes you're not complying with the permit, and then you've got a problem. You could be fined by the state. They could take an action against you and make you do certain other things. So that's a very, very important thing, right? To be able to do these maintenance logs and reports, right? So let's talk a little bit about inspections. What do we look for? So when we're inspecting the inlets, the inlets themselves, that grate on top of the catch basin, all we're really looking to see is it open. Can water get in there? If water can't get in there, if it's clogged with like the slide we saw with debris, Popeye's food cups, whatever it is, it needs to be cleaned, right? So when we're going to log in, we're going to log what type of inlet is it, how big is it, where is it sitting, is it labeled? Most inlets have a number associated with them, whether it's just in the township's files or it's actually on the inlet itself. And then does the inlet meet standards? And what that means is, does the inlet have certain size openings on it? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. For catch basins, a very similar thing. Now, the catch basin, what we're doing is it's kind of hard, because if the inlet's not clean, you can't really see in the catch basin, right? So a lot of times we're taking a heavy-duty flashlight, we're looking in there, we're trying to measure how much debris is in there. We want to make sure that's structurally stable. A lot of catch basins are surrounded by asphalt, and that asphalt can cave in and make it unstructurally sound. So that's one thing we always look at and identify quickly, because that needs to be repaired, because that could be a hazard to automobiles or bicycles or even people walking on the street. So once again, we log what kind of how deep the basin is, how many pipes are coming in and out of it, how much sediment's in it. So these are the things that we log in our inspections. And here's a typical inspection report that you can use. This is obviously done on a computer, so you can go trash and debris. The first item here has trash and debris accumulated in front of the catch basin opening or inlet, And then there's a pull down here. You click on the button, you can say yes, no, not applicable. So we have, these tables are available and you can download these. I think this one it might be from Washington State. A lot of different states have different ones. So we can see these are checklists. Now, a lot of people have these on paper where they just write notes in. Other people have these on some sort of iPad where they go in and they can just plug in the numbers. You could also get an app for your phone and put it on your phone and just go out and inspect it that way. Just makes it a lot easier when you come back to the office. You can upload it into the computer. So these are some of the things that they look at when they're looking at it. Um, so stormwater inlet catch basin maintenance. You want to clear the vegetation out of debris. We actually have seen inlets and catch basins where trees are growing out of them. They're not supposed to be trees growing out of them. They're supposed to be empty so water can go in them, right? So you want to make sure that there's not too much sediment in the bottom. This one actually has what's called a sump in it. So it's a little deeper. A lot of them, the bottom is right at the bottom of the pipe, right? So water comes in and water goes out. In this case, it allows some sediment to settle out in here. And the idea is once the sediment gets about halfway full, you need to pump it out and clean it out and vacuum it out. Is there any structural damage? Is this concrete all in good shape? Is the grate in good shape? Are the pipes in good shape? So these are things that we look at when we inspect these. So the other thing we look at are stormwater detention, or stormwater basins, and there's three types of basins that we think about. So one is a detention basin. So detention basin, you've seen these throughout New Jersey. They're these grass basins, usually with a concrete channel in them. They fill up with rain and fill up with water during the storm event. The next day they're dry. They let the water out slowly. So they detain the water, they hold it for a little period of time, they let it out after the storm. Retention basin retains the water, so it always has water in it. So there's always 3 or 4 feet of water in it. It's basically also referred to as a wet pond. When it rains, additional water comes in and increases the depth of that. So it may be 4 feet deep on a regular basis. When we get a big storm, it may raise the depth to 7 feet deep. And then all the pollution kind of settles out into that retention basin. So that is always wet, often referred to as a wet pond. An infiltration basin is a little different. So water goes in, it's got a smaller opening going out of the basin, so the water will accumulate in there and then slowly percolate into the ground. So the idea is that the water is going to infiltrate more than just hold it and let it out slowly. It's going to hold it and let it soak into the ground, which is the big difference between the infiltration basin and the detention basin. Okay, so we can see the detention basin here. A standard process. You have a riser here where water comes in to the basin. It slowly goes out. Eventually it rises this level and it'll come out and be released under this embankment, the edge of the basin. Usually within 24 to 48 hours, these are dry. They usually have these concrete low flow channels in them. That's to hurry the water out so there's no mosquito breeding. These tend to clog quite a bit with sediment. And they have to be cleaned out on a regular basis. They tend to have a concrete box at the outlet, usually with a grate on it. This grate serves a couple purposes. It keeps trash from going out of the basin, so you can have a place to accumulate it. It also stops children from getting washed into the pipes. Okay, so that's another thing. It's really a safety hazard. If kids are playing, big storm event comes, flash flood, they get sucked into this pipe and they could get seriously injured. So here's another typical basin. You see just a grassed area, mowed on a weekly basis, usually not very healthy for the environment. There's no infiltration here. There's no real habitat for pollinators. It's just all turf grass. This one's surrounded by beautiful Norway maples, which aren't native to the area either. So not a very ecologically sound system. So retention basin looks very similar, except it always has a deep pool of water. A lot of times it has vegetation growing in it on the edges. And the idea is that once it rains, more water fills up and goes out this outlet here on the top. Okay, so that's another system. You can see one here. This one they decided to line with rocks, which is not very good because this becomes a very much of a goose magnet, right? The geese are a tundra species. They land in water. They walk out of the pond and they dine on the turf grass. If you have vegetation around this high enough, 2 or 3 feet high, the geese will not understand if there's predators around there, and they may not land in this basin and go someplace else. So this openness of this basin really attracts the geese. This one's a little bit better. You see some vegetation around, but you also see a lot of algae growing in this, which is not a bad thing. It means it's working. So the pollution and nutrients are accumulating in the basin, instead of going out into the nearby wetlands. So it's a nice system. It actually works the way it's supposed to. The final system here is the infiltration basin. The idea is the water comes in, it usually has some sand in the bottom, and water will infiltrate into the ground. Sometimes there is an under drain pipe in here. If we have too much water, it lets the water out through the under drain pipe. But the idea is as the water is moving through the sand, it's getting cleaner and cleaner. Hopefully more water is going into the ground and going out through this pipe. And these are very popular systems now. And we're going to see a lot more of these in New Jersey. Matter of fact, when you drive down the New Jersey Parkway on your way to Atlantic City, and you look in the island of the Parkway, and you can see a lot of these sand basins are there, and those are all infiltration basins. Okay, and you can see here's one here, it's sandy bottom, water's coming in. This water comes in here, water comes in here, fills up with water, and then eventually will overflow out this outlet here. So it's a fairly nice system. So these are supposed to be inspected on an annual basis based on their approved maintenance plans. If there is no maintenance plans, you have to inspect them more frequently. There's things we're looking for when we inspect these. We want to see if the side slopes are eroded or if there's any erosion or scouring in the basin. If it's a wet pond, we want to see if there's any shoreline erosion. We want to prevent that from happening. We want to see if sediment's accumulating in these systems, because if it is, then we have to get that out because we don't want sediment to accumulate because it'll clog it. Okay. We want to make sure the inlets and outlets are not broken. A lot of this stuff is made of concrete with steel piping in it, steel rods in it. Once the concrete starts breaking away, that rusty steel is exposed. Certainly a hazard for anybody, certainly kids that are playing around it. It's always a problem. Is there standing water in it? A detention basin is supposed to go dry within 24 to 48 hours after the storm. If there's standing water after that time period in a detention basin or infiltration basin, that's not working properly. Okay, and it has to be fixed. In a retention basin, is there nutrient enrichment? In other words, that algae growing on top. Is there a lot of nutrients going in there? So that's another thing that you have to think a little bit about. You may have to do some dredging of that and get some sediment out of there to reduce the amount of nutrients in there. So that may be a way to clean that. Floatables are always an issue. We're always trying to keep plastic bottles and debris out of our waterways. A lot of times it's accumulating in these basins, which is good because we have a place to collect it and pull it out before it goes out into the bay or the ocean. Is the grass healthy? Are there bare spots? Is the vegetation desirable or is it not desirable? So if it's filled with cattails, while cattails do a great job of removing pollution, it's really a monoculture and doesn't really provide a lot of ecological habitat. So we want to try to have a more diverse vegetation. Are there geese? Evidence of geese, and we all know what evidence of geese are if you've ever been to any kind of town park. So if we do have geese, we want to try to figure out how to get rid of the geese and maybe put some buffers around the systems. Okay. So who does the inspection? Well, all the basins, all the facilities that are owned by the township or the city have to be inspected by the township and the city. And like I said, on an annual basis, and if you have a maintenance plan, if not, you have to do it more frequently. If it is a private facility, in other words, a homeowners association, they have to inspect it and report to the town that's been inspected, because the town is ultimately responsible to make sure that all these are working, whether they own them or not. So they usually have a system in place where if you're a homeowner association, every year you have to send a report to the town that your detention basin was inspected and it's working properly, and the town takes that, includes that in their report to the state, and that's very important. And then there's different detention basin inspection forms that we have here, and you can see this kind of goes through all the different observations, the overflows, the spillways, the inlets, the outlets. This is another tool that people can use and get a copy of, and this is the one that we were using in Hamilton Township. And you can see we can kind of go through some of the questions here. It's very important to write down who's inspecting the basin, because if there's a problem and I'm reading about an inspection report, it's nice to be able to go down the hall and talk to Bob or Sue and say, hey, you inspected the basin. Is there anything else you can tell me about it? Or you wrote something here, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. Can you explain it to me a little bit more? So that's why we always have a name. And we always talk about date when it's been inspected, because we always go back and see, did it rain right before that? Is that why there's standing water? And it hadn't rained for like a month and there's still water and it shouldn't be. So those become things that we look at. General observations. Is it functioning properly? malfunctioning structures in the basin. In other words, the outlet structure is not functioning properly. Concrete channels are working right. They're not clogged. Is there standing water in the basins? These are just standard things we look at. Inlets, is there any breakage or damage of the inlets, right? Is there gullying or erosion going on? So these are some things. A lot of times we'll have vegetation growing in these basins blocking the inlet so water can't get in. So we have to make sure that inlet's clear so water can get into the basin. Okay. Accumulation of debris and litter. It's another thing we always worry about. And that's something we're trying to control. And then outlets, the same thing as inlet. We want to make sure nothing's broken, nothing's clogged. Water can easily get out of it. It's not being prevented from leaving the basin when it's supposed to be leaving the basin. And then there's always like an emergency spillway. If the basin fills up with too much water and it can't get out of the outlet pipe, where's it overflowing? And where that overflow is occurring? Is there any erosion associated with that? Is that working okay? And that's another important factor, especially in New Jersey. We're getting these really intense storms. For example, Ida dumped 8 inches of rain, over 6 hours, which none of the detention basins can handle. So they were all overflowing at some point. So, so understanding, was that causing any other problems where that overflow was going? And then the basin outfall. So eventually the water leaves the basin, is going to a stream or the bay. Is it causing any problems in that area? So causing erosion at the stream edge or along the shoreline of the bay. Okay, and then we have recommendations that we make. So there's different types of maintenance for these basins. I'll just go through as quickly. So there's routine and there's non-routine. So routine maintenance really focuses on vegetation maintenance. So when we're talking about detention basin, you're talking about mowing them, on a regular basis, because usually it's just turf grass, right? Making sure the ground cover is healthy, getting rid of debris, making sure all the mechanical components are working, the gates and the valves. In other words, the screens that are on top of the outlet structure, that you're able to lift those up so you can clean out the pipe. Everything's working the way it should be. And you can see some of the things here. Lots of sediment, that's no good. Lots of vegetation around the outlet, that's no good. This is completely clogged, that's no good. So you can see these things would be taken care of under routine maintenance, right? And then you can also see some other things, these broken pieces. This is not supposed to look like this, right? And you can see this is falling apart under here, and you can see Kyle's actually measuring, how big that opening is, so we can figure out how to go back and fix that. Non-routine maintenance, this is stuff that you're not doing that often. Stabilizing, any erosion control repairs, so if there's any erosion, fixing that. Sediment removal. You may be removing sediment out of concrete low flow channel on every couple weeks, but any kind of big sediment removal from maybe a retention basin or a wet pond, maybe that happens once every 4 or 5 years. Okay. Outlet repair and replacement. Sometimes we'll have to take that whole concrete box out and replace it because it's just eroded away. And you can see, like, this is an example of one that has to be completely redone. And then here's some erosion that happens. This is a concrete pad where water's coming out of the basin here, and you can see it's completely eroded away the outlet, and this has to be taken care of immediately. These are definitely serious problems. Okay. Other things we see, this is all clogged up, but this is another thing. The grate is broken. This is supposed to be bolted on here. It's not working, so that has to be fixed. So these are other things we look at. So if you have any questions about this, if you're working for a public works department, you want a more detailed talk on this, you feel free to give us a call. I'm Chris Obropta. Matt Lacconi is one of my engineers. Matt and I do a lot of this work with towns, helping them do inspections and helping them streamline their process. As we go forward with more of these, with new permits starting in January for the municipal separate storm source systems, there's more requirements out there. So there's more of this inspection and cleaning requirements that the towns are going to have to work through. And certainly feel free to give us a call, and we'd be glad to talk you through them and do whatever we can to help. Is that okay, Avery? I'm sorry, that was a little long, but.
That was great. Thank you, Chris. Stormwater management, stormwater infrastructure management is super technical, and a lot of towns we find in our watershed are overwhelmed by it, especially with this influx of the new rules. So hopefully this information is helpful to everyone who's watching to kind of break down all of the requirements, connect you with resources to help you if it's overwhelming for your town, and get everyone to the finish line of proper management of stormwater and really prioritizing this. So
I'm hoping a lot of the public works departments will take this video and watch it, and maybe get some benefit out of it. Because I think it really clearly outlines what the requirements are, and a lot of people are very confused about that. So